Item August 1588, morning off Gravlines. 7 hours of cannon hell, and Philip II's invincible armada no longer looks invincible, or much of an armada at all. Sails torn to rags, masts sheared off, hulls riddled with shot. Spanish galleons that only yesterday were seen as God's hammer are today drifting coffins. By evening, almost no English ship has gone to the bottom, and the Spaniards are fleeing around Scotland and Ireland, places they never planned to fight in. By the end of this story, you'll see how a giant Catholic mega-project, drawn up on paper as a crusade, turns into a lesson. Climate, logistics, and guns can kill imperial arrogance just as surely as any army. Imagine you're a Spanish soldier on a galleon, wedged between barrels of foul water and a priest with a crucifix. You never see the English up close. All you know is the thud of a cannonball in the hull, the crack of splintering wood, flying shards, and the screams of the wounded. You're trained for hand-to-hand fighting, for storming decks, but they keep you below while the ship slowly turns into a target. In the night before battle, it isn't the English who sail into the bay toward you, but fire ghosts, 8 fire ships rushing straight into the Armada's line. Captains in panic hack through their anchor cables, order vanishes in the smoke. A couple of months later, it will turn out that most of your comrades die not from English swords, but on the rocks of Ireland and in the cold water of the North Atlantic. On paper, everything looks like a guaranteed victory for the Catholic superpower. Philip II's Spain is the richest monarchy in Europe, master of American silver and of an armada of ocean-going galleons. Against heretical England, he gathers about 130 ships, roughly 8,000 sailors and up to 19,000 soldiers, plus priests, officials, officers' servants, and thousands of gun barrels, around 2,500 cannon. The English and their Dutch allies put to sea more than 200 ships, but many of them are converted merchantmen. The balance seems to favor Spain, yet by the end of the campaign up to 60 Spanish ships and 18,000 people lie on the seabed or in mass graves, while the English do not lose a single major ship and get off with hundreds, not thousands, of dead. To understand why everything goes so badly off script, you have to pull the camera back. Europe is in the middle not only of a political struggle, but of a theological one. Spain is the main tank of the Catholic world, crushing the Protestant revolt in the Netherlands and at the same time trying to hold together its colonial empire. Elizabeth I's England, after the break with Rome, is an irritating Protestant island, meddling in the Dutch revolt and sending privateers like Francis Drake into the ocean to rob Spanish convoys. For the Spaniards, this is no longer just piracy. It's an attack on their tax system. When Elizabeth formally enters the war on the Dutch side and Drake puts Spanish ports to the torch, Philip moves from notes of protest to a plan. Erase the English problem altogether. There is another layer, the religious one. The Pope has already excommunicated Elizabeth, and Catholics around the world have a moral green light to try to overthrow her. In 1587, Mary Stuart, a Catholic pretender to the English throne, is executed, and for Philip this becomes not just geopolitics but, as he sees it, a holy mission to bring England back into the fold of Rome. The Pope grants indulgences to participants in the expedition and allows special church taxes to be raised for the enterprise of England. In Madrid, it's sold as a punitive crusade. Theologians write treatises, court artists sketch triumphal entries into London. Against that backdrop, mundane things, tides, storms, the quality of the provision casks, look secondary. That is the first crack in the armor. Philip's plan is highly ambitious, and for the late 16th century, almost sounds like an Excel spreadsheet operation. A huge fleet sails from Spain, crosses the Bay of Biscay, moves up the English Channel, keeps the English fleet at bay, and, reaching the coast of Flanders, picks up the army of the Duke of Parma, about 30,000 hardened veterans of the Dutch War. These men, on hundreds of barges, are meant to cross the Channel under the Armada's cover, land in Kent or at the mouth of the Thames and march on London. Everything depends on perfect coordination, precise timing, favorable weather, the alignment of fleet, army, tides, and bureaucracy. No element is allowed to fail, which in reality means that almost all of them do. Now for the imba, the broken mechanic, and the difference in styles. The Spaniards enter 1588 with the mindset of Lepanto 1571, big lumbering galleons and galleasses sailing in formation, firing one or two broadsides, and then trying to close in, smash into the enemy and take him by boarding. The whole bet is on infantry, the famous Spanish tercio, the best in Europe. Guns in their doctrine are just a prelude to hand-to-hand fighting, not the main weapon. The English are playing a different game. Their new race-built galleons are shorter, lighter, faster. Their guns are long-barreled, set up for repeated firing at ranges where boarding is impossible. At the heart of English doctrine is not a brawl on the deck, but essentially an artillery duel at range, a floating shooting gallery where you punch hole after hole in the enemy hull while staying out of reach. The English have another hidden trump card, geography and logistics. They are fighting in their own backyard, in the Channel, where you can quickly bring in shot, food, powder, and rotate tired crews. The Spaniards drag with them not only soldiers, but siege guns, construction timber, supplies for a long campaign, plus crowds of people who on deck only eat and pray. The ships are overloaded, maneuverability drops, provisions spoil. Chronicles complain about rotten biscuits and water that stinks like a stagnant pond. Add cramped, damp holds where disease spreads faster than rumors. While the Armada is still just searching for the English, it is already losing combat effectiveness, a little bit every day. At the top of the pyramid stands a strange choice of commander. After the death of seasoned sea-wolf Alvaro de Bazan, overall command passes to Alonso Pérez de Guzmán, Duke of Medina Sidonia. A rich grandee, a good courtier, and a man with almost no experience of major naval operations. He honestly writes Philip a letter. The fleet is raw, the ports are unprepared, the men inexperienced, and he himself is no sailor. The letter is basically a cry of, "Sire, this could end badly." The court, afraid of how the king reacts to bad news, is in no hurry to put it on his desk. The official line in Madrid, "The Armada is invincible because God is with us." The English will later phrase it more sharply. They put to sea expecting not Medina Sidonia, but the Holy Ghost to command. The English, meanwhile, are not sitting on their hands and use their favorite move, the preemptive raid. In 1587, Francis Drake bursts into Cadiz and other ports and burns about 36 ships and stockpiles, what he himself calls singeing the King of Spain's beard. This pushes the start of the campaign back by at least a year and gives English shipyards time to finish their vessels and train the crews. The Spanish plan, built on the effect of surprise, is already cracking. The enemy knows that a huge fleet is coming and has time to set up a chain of coastal beacons, gather its own ships, and prepare privateers. The Invincible hasn't even left port, and its opponents are already learning to shoot faster and more accurately. Finally, on 28th May 1588, the Armada sails out of Lisbon. Getting such a huge fleet to sea takes 2 full days. The ships literally squeeze out of the harbor one by one, like traffic leaving a megacity. On board are about 130 ships, up to 30,000 men, thousands of guns. But already in the Bay of Biscay, the fleet runs into a storm. Several ships are forced to turn back, some put into La Coruña for repairs. The command loses precious time, provisions rot even faster, men fall sick. By the time the Armada again heads for the Channel, its strength is down to around 137 ships, many of them damaged and handling worse. This is a campaign that is aging before it even meets the enemy. England is buzzing too. The crown is broke, drowning in debt, but it has one key advantage, a seafaring culture. John Hawkins reforms the Navy, rationalizes supply, standardizes gun calibers, oversees the training of gunners. Private shipowners arm their vessels in hope of prize money. Drake and the other sea dogs have real combat experience. Along the coast, a chain of beacons is set up, passing news faster than any rider. When the Armada finally appears off Cornwall in July, it does not catch England asleep. English ships sail out of Plymouth and latch onto its tail, refusing to let it move calmly up the channel. Now picture yourself as an English sailor on one of the new galleons. Unlike your Spanish opposite number, you live on a ship for which fighting at range is the default. When you first see the Armada's formation, it looks almost mythic. A huge arc of ships on the horizon, banners snapping, religious standards shining. But your captain is not eager to heroically ram this wall. The English take the weather gauge, grab the wind, and begin methodically shelling the outer Spanish ships from ranges where return fire is wildly inaccurate. A race up the channel begins. The Armada moves in a tidy crescent. The English swarm like a pack of faster predators, darting in to bite from a safe distance and slipping away again. There are no massive losses yet, but Spanish nerves are already shredded. For the Spaniards, this kind of enemy tactics feels like cheating. Their heavy ships sail worse to windward, turn more slowly, and their gunners are not trained for long artillery duels. At Lepanto, 1 or 2 opening broadsides were enough. After that, the infantry did the work. Now there is no boarding at all. English cannonballs smash rigging, knock out rudders, bring down masts, but never give a chance to grab the enemy rail and drag him into the hand-to-hand fight where the Spanish tercio is truly terrifying. Every day of combat in the Channel is also a psychological lesson. This huge, proper fleet, confident in its superior infantry and its faith, is forced to endure a duel fought at a range chosen by someone else. A new naval era is born here, a war of guns, not boarding hooks. By 27th of July, the Armada reaches the waters off Calais and Gravelines and drops anchor, hoping at last to complete the main part of the plan, to pick up Parma's army. And here a strategic bug surfaces that makes the whole campaign almost meaningless. Parma sits with his troops in Flemish ports, surrounded by shallows and blocked by Dutch ships. He doesn't have enough barges to bring the army out in one lift, and more importantly, he has almost no way to transport them safely to the Armada. Shallow waters and a blockade stand in the way. Communication between him and Medina Sidonia is weak. Letters take a long time to arrive, and often don't arrive at all. The Spanish fleet that was supposed to be an armored bus for the army suddenly becomes a luxury ship with no passengers. Meanwhile, the English watch the giant lying at anchor and prepare their main trick. On the night of 7 to 8 of August, the English start smearing old ships with pitch and stuffing them with junk. They strip off the guns and evacuate the crews. What they get are 8 huge floating torches. Wind and tide are set straight towards the Spanish anchorage off Calais. When these dark shapes with burning fuses drift into the Armada's field of view, a collective trauma kicks in. A few years earlier, the Spaniards had seen fire ships destroy the pontoon bridge at Antwerp. Panic erupts on the galleons. Captains fear that these flaming kamikaze Cadillacs will blow up their powder magazines. Many cut their anchor cables and flee into the darkness, colliding, losing formation and position. The Armada wakes up in the morning with no anchors, no formation, and, most importantly, no way to hold its position off Flanders. The long-term consequences of that one night of panic are catastrophic. Losing the anchors means that later the ships will be far more vulnerable off the dangerous coasts of Scotland and Ireland. With no way to hold on in place, they will simply be driven onto rocks. But already the next day, this gives the English a perfectly scattered enemy. Spanish chroniclers leave vivid scenes from that night. Ships' bells ringing the alarm, groups of sailors praying in the firelight, priests running along the decks with relics, someone in panic firing at the fire ships that are going to burn out anyway. This is the moment when a psychological factor, the fear of fire on a wooden powder keg packed with men, breaks a strategy designed by kings. At dawn, the English see not a perfect crescent, but a formation torn to shreds. 8th August 1588 is the climax of the whole story, the Battle of Gravelines. The The English under Charles Howard and Drake attack the disorganized Spanish line. They use both the wind and the range of their guns. They close to a distance where their shot already punches through hulls, while the Spaniards still cannot aim accurately. For about 8 hours they chase and bombard the Armada's flagships and heavy ships. Several vessels run aground or are badly damaged. One of the big galleasses loses control and ends up beached near Calais. According to modern research, not a single major Spanish ship sinks outright during the battle itself, but many become virtual cripples, unable to continue the campaign. The English lose, by most estimates, dozens killed and hundreds wounded, and not one ship. On this day it becomes clear there will be no invasion of England. Even so, the English do not turn success into total destruction. Powder and shot are running low, the ships are exhausted, and the waters around Gravelines are shallow and dangerous. No one wants their victory to end in running aground. Medina Sidonia holds a council and decides not to try to force a way back through the channel under fire, but to lead the remains of the Armada north, around the British Isles via Scotland, and return home through the Atlantic. On the map this looks reasonable, but in the real North Atlantic at summer's end it borders on suicidal. The fleet has little fresh water and food, many ships are already damaged, and some lost their anchors that night off Calais. At this point, the weather effectively takes over the Spanish War, and it hits harder than English guns. The journey home turns into a marathon of survival. Mistakes in navigation lead many captains to think they are sailing safely far from shore, when in fact they are dangerously close to the rocky coasts of Scotland and especially Ireland, where currents and winds drag them onto shoals. By modern estimates, off Ireland alone between 17 and 24 Armada ships are wrecked along a 500-kilometre stretch, and about 6,000 people die there from drowning, cold, and killings on shore. One of the grimmest episodes is the loss of the galleass La Girona. About 300 people on board, and 9 make it back to Spain alive. This is no longer war. It is a string of shipwrecks smeared along a windy, hostile coast. Out of this hell, a few living voices reach us. One of them is Captain Francisco de Cuellar, who leaves a detailed account of how his ship breaks up off the Irish shore, how local bands strip his comrades naked and kill them, how he himself hides for weeks in bogs and forests, guided by rumors of friendly Gaelic chiefs. In his story, we see episodes where Spanish survivors join skirmishes against English garrisons, watch their comrades hanged without trial, and finally, through Scotland and the Low Countries, make it back home. Such lucky ones are rare. Most simply vanish in the waves or in anonymous mass executions that the dry statistics reduce to a line. Dozens of ships lost, up to 18,000 people dead in the whole campaign, the majority outside of battle. What is happening in England at the same time? There the propaganda machine is running at full power. Elizabeth the Fair appears before the militia at Tilbury in armour over her royal dress and delivers a speech in which she admits that she has the body of a weak woman, but the heart and stomach of a king. The text survives in several versions, but the effect is the same. The subjects see in their queen not just a monarch, but a leader literally on horseback. Officially, the victory is summed up by the formula, "God blew, and they were scattered." The fleet returns home as a hero. Drake and Howard appear on canvases and engravings. For a historian, though, it is important to keep a clear head. The English stood firm and won tactically, but the decisive role was played not only by their guns, but also by storms and by Spanish strategic mistakes. The long-term consequences are more complicated than the school myth, Spain lost, England became an empire. The war between the countries drags on until 1604. Spain builds new galleons and remains a major power, and English attempts at a counter-armada in 1589 end in failure and heavy losses. But the psychological landscape changes. The myth of the invincibility of Spanish sea power cracks. It becomes clear that even the richest monarchy can wreck a campaign if its plans clash with logistics and geography. England, by contrast, starts to see naval war as its natural element, gradually turning the fleet into its main instrument of power. On the tactical level, the defeat of the Armada cements the shift toward warfare of heavy guns and maneuvering lines rather than medieval-style boarding slaughters. In cultural memory, this campaign splits into two legends. In England, the image of the Protestant wind is born, a series of storms that supposedly strike Catholic fleets on purpose and help Protestants from the Armada onward. The Armada portrait of Elizabeth with her hand on a globe turns a real pile of drowned sailors into a neat symbol of a chosen island. In Spanish tradition, by contrast, the emphasis often falls on the elements, on unlucky winds, and on the fact that the fleet was destroyed less by the enemy than by storms and poor coordination with Parma. Modern historians try to remove both layers of myth at once. This was no miracle, but a combination of a technological shift in favor of English artillery, specific organizational failures in Madrid, and simply bad preparation for sailing in dangerous northern waters. In the end, the story of the Invincible Armada is not a fairy tale about brave little guys defeating a big villain, but a parable about what happens when states treat God as part of the general staff. Spain builds a gigantic fleet, loads it with faith, gold, and political calculation, but hardly allocates any reserve for storms, bad communication, and an uncontrollable reality. England, on the contrary, bets on modest but precise things: speed, range, supply, intelligence. As a result, more Spaniards die on the rocks of unknown coasts and from the greed of their own bureaucracy than from English blades. In this sense, off Gravlines and along the Irish shore, not just a fleet sinks. An illusion does. The illusion that you can conquer the world if you draw a beautiful invasion plan and stamp it with the Pope's seal. The Armada's story is a reminder. The sea doesn't read your orders. It just does what it does.